Hi, everybody. It's Monday. It's 1 o'clock, and after a break of, I guess, 3 weeks, we're back live. I was away last week at the wedding of my son, so that I wasn't able to give a shiur, and the week before that, because of the preparations, you'll recall I pre-recorded the shiur. So now we're back alive, and you're welcome to comment as we go. And hopefully this will continue as usual on Mondays at Mondays at 1. Those of you who've been following know that we are sponsored, or coming here through the aegis of the Tel Aviv International Synagogue under the inspired leadership of Rabbi Ariel Constantine. The Mishnah that we had been discussing, actually I'd given two classes on this Mishnah. As I said, it's one of these Mishnayot that we really need to break them into the component parts. Is the first of a series of statements which are attributed to Rabbi Akiva. In the first class, we discussed Rabbi Akiva's biography and his overall significance historically. And now we are going to discuss, and then that was the first class. Second class, we talked about an enigmatic statement about lightheadedness and frivolity and sexual impropriety and so on. And now Rabbi Akiva goes over to another topic. The overall theme that unites all the various pieces of this Mishnah are that some things prevent other things. So the next section of the Mishnah is made up of 3 words, but 3 in today's religious, especially Orthodox discourse, 3 sledgehammer words. Masoret siag laTorah. Tradition is a protective fence around the Torah. We're not talking, or we may be talking actually. I was going to dismiss it right away, but we're not really. I was going to say we're not really talking about tradition as in Fiddler on the Roof, but maybe yes. We'll have to see. In fact, these 3 what I described as sledgehammer words are so important that I may even either go over time today or perhaps continue the discussion next week. In any event, let's try to define our terms as is our wont. Masoret siag laTorah. Tradition is a fence, a protective fence around the Torah. The word siag in general, when it pops up at least in Pirkei Avot, well, we encountered it already once in the first Mishnah, that the members of the Great Assembly, the authority of the oral law, that the highest authority of the oral law in the early days of the Second Temple, admonished future generations, Asif siag laTorah, make a fence around the Torah. Now there, the meaning is traditionally meant, I'm still very jet-lagged, excuse me. The meaning that is attributed to those words is traditionally that the rabbis there are encouraging their heirs, their spiritual descendants, to be careful to enact laws around the Torah's prohibitions and positive commandments to make sure that they either are not violated or to make sure that they are maintained. So, for example, I'll give you an example of each. The fact that I'll give you a classic one. It is most likely true that, at least that's the accepted norm, that the prohibition against eating milk and meat together is restricted to beef. It does not include fowl. It does not include chicken and turkey. Well, turkey certainly, because Chazal didn't know what turkey was. But because of the fact that generally poultry is considered to be meat in common parlance, they rabbinically said, don't eat poultry with milk or cheese, because you're going to end up getting mixed up. So one thing will inevitably lead, there is a slippery slope, and this one is very slippery, inevitably lead you to violate the Torah prohibition against eating beef and milk. So that's one type of thing. There's that's to ensure that you don't violate something. What about how do you legislate things to make sure you actually proactively perform a commandment? So here we can come to easily to the first Mishnah in the entire Talmud, where the Mishnah says that a person actually could recite the Shema at night, all night, until let's play it till dawn. Okay, there's all kinds of discussions, but let's say till dawn. But the Talmud then said, but the Mishnah goes on and says, however, nevertheless, you should try. The rabbis insisted that you try to, or commanded that you should actually try to say the evening prayers, including Mariv, and say recite, which includes Kriya Shema, before midnight. Why? So later on in the Talmud quotes a Baraita, which is a parallel passage of the rabbis of the Mishnah, where the Talmud uses the word, where the rabbis use the word siag. Chachamim masu siag ledivrehem. The rabbis made a fence around their words. This restriction to before midnight is a preventative measure. What kind of preventative measure? You're not preventing a person from sinning, but you want to prevent a person from not fulfilling his obligations. What could happen? So a person could come home, he works very hard, what would happen? He goes home, he says, I don't want to daven yet. I don't want to eat. I want to, I don't want to daven yet. I want to eat, I want to take a nap. I'll daven later. And says this Baraita, this Tanaitic passage says, so it's going to happen. People are tired. We all fall asleep in front of the television, right? So you're going to eat something, you'll have some wine. That was the beverage of choice. It wasn't like today when we're drinking caffeinated sodas. And you fall asleep, and you sleep all night, and you'll miss Mariv. So the proper thing to do is to first go to shul, and you should learn a little bit, and then you should say Kriyat Shema, and you should daven, and then go home and have dinner and fall asleep, and that's fine. So you have different type of siyagim to ensure that, again, that either that Torah principles, Torah behaviors are not either violated, or that which one was obligated to do, one does. Okay. Anyways, so that's one reason. That's the one purpose. That's one meaning of the word siag that you find in the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. In the present text, we have a little bit of a nuance, a little bit of a slightly different, nuanced use of siag. Masoret siag la Torah. Masoret is a siag to protect the Torah, not to prevent something bad from happening, whether it's a sin of omission or commission, but to protect the Torah, to protect the integrity of the Torah. Here, something is really a matter of defending the Torah. The question is, what is Masoret, and what are you defending it from? So here, you have two really broad approaches to the understanding of the word Masoret. One was dominant until about the 18th century, and then, for reasons which I hope will become clear, another understanding of the word became more relevant and became more frequent. Okay, so the older tradition, and this goes back to the rabbis themselves, and you find this in Rashi, and you find this in almost all the medievals. Masoret siag la Torah. The word Masoret here does not mean tradition in the sense of having gefilte fish on, or dagmar, or cut Moroccan fish on Shabbat in the afternoon when you come back from shul, but rather Masoret is really a synonym for another form of the word Masorah. Masorah means to pass on. Actually, the word tradition, that's exactly what the word means. Dira, to pass or to say on, to pass on orally. What is this Masorah? So the Masorah is generally understood to mean the correct state or the correct edition, the correct text of, to start with, the Chumash, then also followed by Nevi'im and Ksuvim. In other words, the proper text of the Tanakh. How is it written, and how are words spelled, and when are words written in their full form with all kinds of extra yuds and vavs and stuff like that, and how, and when you write a Sefer Torah, when are the various passages, when do they begin, when do they end, when are there spacing, when is there spacing, when do you put little dots on top of, for those of you, many of you should know, you might know that there are many occasions, especially in Chumash, you find a number of, you find words that will have dots on top of them, and those have various forms of significance. The Masorah means to preserve the integrity of the text of the Torah. So why? So number one, I understand the words then. Masorah Siag LaTorah. Masorah Siag LaTorah. I don't want errors creeping into the text of the Torah. First of all, because the Torah is given by God, and therefore has to be preserved pristinely as much as humanly possible. It's number one. Number two, those of us who still remember copying things by hand with pen and pencil know that it's very easy when you're copying something to make mistakes. There's all kinds of scribal errors that you could simply if you're copying a shopping list. One of the more famous, fancy, here's something for you to amaze your friends at a cocktail party. One of the most famous ways of, one of the most famous errors that occur is called the homoi teleaton. There it goes. Homoi teleaton. That means skipping something because of two things that are similar. What does that mean? Very often in the same text, if you're copying out a text by hand, you'll find the same word in the same paragraph. And one's eye naturally sort of goes from one occurrence of this word, which you're looking for, to another. If you end up, and it happens very, very frequently, this happens in manuscripts all the time, that you're looking at one word and you're copying, and then when you go back to look at the text, you look for the same word that you stop with, but you end up landing on the word that appears later on, and you continue from there. So what's in the middle gets lost. That's called homoi teleaton, and in many, many medieval manuscripts, this is a problem. Yeah, okay, fine. You're talking about a human being's book, all right, that's sad, and it can be very disturbing, and it can be deceptive, and it can misrepresent the author, but still not the Torah. Here you have to be very, very careful, because the Torah is the pristine, as much as possible, the pristine text of the Torah has to be maintained. Plus the fact that the way the Torah is written, and the way that the orthography, the way that the words are spelled, with an aleph, without an aleph, with a vav, without a vav, all of these have halachic significance. And that's just, those of you who follow know that Rabbi Akiva, for example, and here is somebody, here's a statement that's attributed to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was well known for a person saying that every single jot and tittle, don't ask me where that comes from, every single kotzo shel yud, every single little spitz of the Torah has significance. So you obviously have to be absolutely exact in the way that you copy things. Never mind that halachically, a Sefer Torah that's missing a letter, a Sefer Torah in which two letters touch each other, a Sefer Torah in which anything isn't clear is puzzle. You can't read from it. It's of no value. So that Rabbi Akiva here, probably in light, giving extra push in light of the fact that he thought that every single little doodad on the letters has legal significance, is saying, have a copy of the book in front of you. And there are these huge books called Sifrei Masorah, which lay out the rules about how to write this and how to write that, and where do you push this passage and that passage, and so on. Now, that doesn't mean that there haven't been, over the generations, small errors that have creeped in, or small differences that have crept in. We have no word text, we have no original text to check against, and that becomes an issue in terms of Sephardim and Ashkenazim and Temanim. The earliest exact text of the Tanakh that we have is called the Keter Aram Tzova, the Aleppo Codex, which actually came from Tiberia in Eretz Israel. It was used by Maimonides, and then ended up being brought to Chaleb, to Aleppo, by a descendant of Maimonides. And it dates to the 9th or the 10th century, but that's still 10th century CE. That's relative to the giving of the Torah, it's 2,100 years later. Nevertheless, what's really striking is the fact that not so much the authenticity and the imprecision of the Aleppo Codex, of the Keter Aram Tzova. And by the way, I highly recommend a book by Matti Friedman called the Aleppo Codex, which is available in Hebrew and in English, which is all about this amazing book and what happened to it. It had tremendous adventures, and it was part of it disappeared, and it's connected with the establishment of the State of Israel. It's a very exciting story. It's not for right now. But one of the striking things is when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date from the centuries before the Common Era, the differences between the text of the Tanakh that we have and the text of the Tanakh that they had in the Judean desert in the center of the Maccabean era, at least, or maybe a little later, is almost exactly the same. So this admonition to keep everything very, very precise was very much honored, and it was a tremendous. It was a tremendous discovery that, in fact, that the consistency of the text, that we can be pretty confident that that which we have, when we say V'zot Torah shesam Moshe lefnei bnei Yisrael pi Hashem b'yad Moshe, that this is the Torah which Moses had put before the people and by the word of God, we can say with confidently. So that's, and in fact, that's one of the reasons why being a sofer, being a scribe, is such an exhausting job, because of the kind of pressure and the kind of precision that's required. Now, I'll add one. Now, that's in terms of the text of the Torah and the divinity of the Torah and the halachic, the legal implications of the various ways the Torah is written this way and not that way. I'll add that among Kabbalists, among Jewish mystics, this exhortation by Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva did have mystical tendencies, we know this, this exhortation by Rabbi Akiva, or admonition, is even more weighty, for the simple reason that the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics, as opposed to, say, Jewish philosophers or just rabbinic scholars see this as the word of God. It reflects what God says. According to the mystic, which is fine, but according to the mystics, the Torah is an emanation. Even when you take out the Sefer Torah, it's an emanation from God. Nachmanides says it's made up of names of God, which means it's an extension of God. It's a living, pulsating reality. Excuse me. Sorry. It's a living, pulsating reality. So that even reinforces the immediacy of the need to be careful in terms of one's copying of the Torah. So that's taking the word in the narrow sense, or the phrase in the narrow sense. Now, when you consider the fact that at the time of Rabbi Akiva, the oral law was not allowed to be written, everything was kept oral. It's an explicit statement in the Talmud and Gittin, Dvarim shebichtav yata rashai lomram bal peh, Dvarim shebal peh yata rashai lomram bichtav. That things that are written, one is not allowed to just recite orally, but you have to have a book in front of you. Don't recite Torah from memory. The Vilna Gaon, I'm not going to go into this right now, it's a question of the sanctity of printing, but the Vilna Gaon says that's the reason why you want to pray by heart, okay, but you're not allowed to say Kriyat Shema, you're not allowed to recite Shema or any passage from the Bible if from memory, because things which are written you're not allowed to say orally. Similarly, things that are passed on orally, like the Mishnah, like the Talmud, like all of the oral law, you're not allowed to write down. They are not to be partly not to equate them with in their sanctity to the written law. Second of all, because the oral law is a process, it's an approach of learning as well as a corpus of as a body of knowledge. So in the time of Rabbi Akiva, the only thing you were allowed to write down was the Tanakh. So therefore, his admonition is restricted to the Tanakh. Okay, now, however, later on, hard to know when, let's say by the early Talmudic period, by the 3rd century CE, it became a concern developed that the oral law had become, the old tradition which had been developing and expanding for 1,400 years, had gotten to be so large, and the situation of the Jewish people was so unstable at the time, both in Eretz Israel and in Babylonia, that it would be wise to write it down. Now, the Mishnah, which is the first summation of the oral law, was redacted and organized by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, who died around 222 CE, 222 CE, as a part of a process of editing and putting together and formulating. It was started by Rabbi Akiva, but it was all oral. After that, they said, look, we're not supposed to write down things which are oral, but this is an emergency. This is an emergency, and drastic measures are required if we're going to save things. That being the case, because the Mishnah was written down. The same thing, but the Mishnah would continue to be studied orally, and that which later became the Talmud, those long protocols of discussion around the Mishnayot and everything else under the sun that make up both Talmuds, the Jerusalem and the Babylonian, were maintained orally. People knew things by heart. People knew it. Look, the truth of the matter is that how should I put this? The human brain is capable of memorization to degrees we don't even think, because we write everything down and we put it on a flash drive or whatever the case might be. But think about it this way. Think of all the stuff that we walk around with in our heads that takes up gray matter, and it's, when things far more constructive could have occupied those places. Never mind passwords and how to change a carburetor. I mean, I don't know, whatever the case might be, it could be devoted to things far more, far greater worth. Never mind the Lashon Hara about whatever Kanye West has to say today, tomorrow, whether just another anti-Semite time. But the truth of the matter is that there is definitely a prejudice in the Torah, in Jewish tradition, for memorization. Maimonides, for example, writes in his introduction to the Mishnah Torah that he expected people would know the entire Mishnah Torah by heart and they would review it every 30 days. Rabbi Yosef Karo says the same thing later in the 16th century about the Shulchan Aruch. So knowing by heart, and so when in Orthodox day schools you have this a lot, where kids are encouraged to learn to memorize vast amounts of Mishnah and so on. That's not just entertainment and competition. There's a very strong Jewish tradition to that that encourages that kind of oral knowledge. Anyways, once you start writing down the Mishnah, and then a few hundred years later the Talmud, after it had been edited, the same concern that motivated Rabbi Akiva to say Masoret Siag LaTorah in terms of the Tanakh itself became relevant for the Talmud, for the Mishnah, and for the Talmud, because as people relied more and more on books, the precision and the accuracy of the way that the traditions of the rabbis were preserved became critical. So Therefore, care had to be expended to make sure that all the words of the Talmud were properly transmitted and carefully transmitted and precisely transmitted. And in fact, for all kinds of reasons, there is a remarkable consistency among the traditions of the Talmud throughout the world, but nevertheless, they weren't as careful. Things just didn't work out that way. Maybe people remembered things differently, whatever the case might be. You have parallel passages, and you have differences of text between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, between the different yeshivot in Babylonia. To a significant degree, these have a tendency to be about spelling only. I mean, to a large degree, but there are whole passages that in some Gemaras you have them and some you don't. This is even before the Christians start forcing Jews to censor and they burn books and you don't have books to copy and so on. And even if the consistency of the Talmud is fairly admirable, never mind what happens when it comes to just copying books. Copying books already is another story. The same kind of care was not exerted, and it's one of the reasons why. One of the reasons why even major texts, commentaries on Chumash, commentaries on the Bible, commentaries on commentaries on the law, responsa, these books were not treated with the same kind of, I won't say deference. Of course, they would draft with deference, but they were not. There was felt to be not as much a need to be as exact in one's copying. On the contrary, one of the things you find, for example, in the commentaries of the Tosafists, of the grandchildren of Rashi, their students and their students, is that the scribes ended up, because they didn't want to write so much, they ended up editing, condensing, and being much more styptic in the way that they wrote, and rendering many of the passages on the Talmud harder to understand. It's one of the reasons why, if in many cases, sometimes you have to go look at the manuscripts or look at other editions of the commentaries on various tractates, for example, to be able to understand them, because scribes sort of felt themselves, especially Ashkenazi scribes, so Sephardim were a little bit more respectful and a little bit more careful. If you understand what's going on. But again, precision is exactly the name of the game. Masoret, Siag LaTorah. When you copy, when you repeat that what you study hear from your teachers, that's what preserves the integrity of the Torah and prevents misrepresentation of the Torah and misrepresentation of the teachings of the great scholars, and whatever the case might be. There's more to say. I see. I was right. This is going to take This is going to take two sessions. That's the narrow meaning of the three words, and you do see in the commentaries on Avot that these three stages of the meaning of the Masoret, of the word Masoret or Masora, play a role. In other words, precision in the biblical text, precision in the literature of the rabbis, especially the Talmud, and then the question of having books that are carefully edited, not edited. Good, I'm looking for the word now. Good. When a person, when you check to see if there are errors. Whatever, you know what I mean. If a book, you should not keep. There's one place you should not keep a book which has not been copy edited. There you go, copy edited in your house, because it can be deceptive. It can actually, you have mistakes. You have to be very, very careful. And that's only the books. We haven't talked about the people who use the books, and how did the word Masoret expand, and where did that come from, and why is it that today, whenever somebody wants to make a change in halacha or in Jewish practice, they all scream tradition, and that already brings us closer to Tevya. But it's now already 1:30, and so I'm going to have to leave you hanging until next week. In the meantime, enjoy, and we will see you, Mr. Shem, next Monday.